Assalamu alaikum ji, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Salem Rehman. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Noor International University. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by Carl Rogers from the US Consulate here in Lahore. Carl, hi, how are you? And welcome.
Thanks for having me, Salem. I'm good, thanks. It's been a busy
Great.
day. The ambassador was here earlier today, so doing
In
public
Lahore.
diplomacy on a day when he's here in Lahore, it's a busy day. But I'm happy to be with you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us and taking out the time. So, in typical fashion, Carl, we'll just request the admin team to cut over to a promo of Noor International University to do an introduction, and then we'll be back in about a minute and a half to continue the show. So, admin team, over to you. Great. Thank you, admin team. Okay, welcome back, Carl. I'll quickly do an introduction for Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is the Deputy Public Affairs Officer at the US Consulate General in Lahore and also spokesperson. He joined the State Department in 2016. He's previously served in Nepal and China. He's responsible for the consulate's social media, media outreach, and alumni programs. He's originally from Oklahoma. Carl now calls New York home and, of course, temporarily Lahore as well. Carl holds an MFA in choreography and completed his coursework and qualifying exams for a PhD in critical dance studies from the Ohio State University. Carl also is an assistant professor of dance at the College of Brockport, where he served as graduate program director and taught composition, improvisation, modern dance technique, repertory, dance history, and aesthetics and culture. Wow, tongue twister. Carl's performance credits include projects with Terry Creech, the lead collaborator and performer of David Dorfman Dance from 2005 to 16, performing in many of the world's most prestigious dance venues: Jacob's Pillow, the American Dance Festival, the Bates Dance Festival, St. Petersburg National Theatre, Danza Isadora, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and the Yerba Buena Arts Center in San Francisco. Rogers is also an artistic director and founder of the Red Dirt Dance from 2004 to 2016. Carl, with that phenomenal introduction, very varied experience in your past, and of course, sitting before us today in a very unique position. Um, today's topic is social media power hour. I think a challenge for everyone. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion over the next 30 minutes. Why don't before we go into the topic for today, anything that we may have missed in your personal or professional background, which you may think is worth a share? So over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you for the thorough introduction. It's always a little bashful to hear that much about myself, but I will tell you. I think the first question that comes to everybody's mind when they hear about my background is like, what happened? How did you move from the arts world into diplomacy? And I think my response to that is always that I think that people don't always understand what artists actually do and the world that artists live in. So I mean, as an example, as a member of a dance company, I had to learn, teamwork, the value of the work that's behind the scenes to make a final product that looks beautiful. There's, the sort of confidence in front of being in front of people, both as a speaker and as a performer. I think these are things that help me in my job as spokesperson.
Mm,
And then in terms of my own dance company that I did run for about 12 years, I self-produced most of my work. So, I had to advocate for myself with theaters. I had to write press releases. I had to figure out how to put my own work onto social media. So I had a lot of experience on that side of the house. So being an artist isn't just making the things; it's also figuring out how to
mm,
get your art out into the world. And I think that's what has prepared me to do public diplomacy kind of work. And then the last thing I'll just say is I think the State Department really honors diversity and inclusion. And I'm not the first artist that's ever joined the State Department, but I will tell you that my diverse background helps me a lot, and I think that people do look at it and value it quite a lot. Um,
mm.
and in some jobs, it's come in quite handy. My previous posting was in Nepal, where I was the cultural affairs officer, and I worked quite a lot with universities and alumni and academics when I was there. And these, because of my background in academia, were also very comfortable spaces to navigate in. So I feel strangely prepared, even though I have an arts background, to do the job that I have now. So, uh, you know, uh, I think that's my supplement to your introduction of myself to answer the
Fantastic.
big question in the room.
And you hit the nail on the head when you said that in the performing arts, the behind the scenes work is the real work, and what you see up front is just a fraction really of the amount of effort that's gone into to making the creation possible. And
Yeah.
hence, I think the diplomacy and the art world definitely, I think, transitions well. So, Carl, if I were to ask you very quickly before we move on into our topic for today, here as the public affairs officer and spokesperson for the U.S. consulate, and you mentioned education as being one of the areas, and we'd like to touch upon that, dilate that opportunity for our students who may want to transition or segue into something in the U.S. in terms of opportunities. Could we briefly talk about that before we go into our topic for today?
Sure.
So
So the education piece.
yes, the education piece. So what are the opportunities that you think, for students and graduates planning to study in the US? Can we spend like 2 or 3 minutes just helping you dilate?
Of course.
Um,
So, I mean, I think what I'll say first is, I'm going to brag for a second, which is that the United States is home to the best institutions in the world. And I think we all know that. No matter what kind of institution you're looking for, you will find a top notch, ranking institution in the United States that's a good fit for you. Some people want to go to a small liberal arts college, some people want to go to large universities where they can become specialists very quickly. I really, depending upon who you are and what you want to study, you will find world-class educators and great institutions in order to support you. Pieces of advice I'd have for students that are studying at NIU, like there's the United States Education Foundation of Pakistan. We have a branch here in Lahore. Please use that as a resource. So look up USEF Pakistan because they will connect you with a program called Education USA, and they will help guide you through the process of what it is and how to apply for the United States. And then the last thing that I'll just say is I think sometimes when we start thinking about education, particularly students, and parents of students, I think we think so specifically about what program do I want to study, what do I want to do with my life, and we get very one track minded. And I think that we forget that when you are a student abroad, it's a cultural exchange as well. And that half of your education, if not more, is the experience that you have when you're living in a different country, negotiating your own values with values of other people, and experiencing the diversity of the globe. And I would also argue that's one of the reasons that US education is so strong, is because no matter what institution you go to, the amount of international students that you're going to encounter, plus just the diversity of America, is going to give you a real global perspective that will help you in no matter what career you decide to be in.
Very true. I think, Carl, and having been a beneficiary of the US undergraduate education, I can personally vouch for the fact that indeed it is a cultural immersion. It's well beyond just an educational experience. It's a life experience. And I think,
I
like you mentioned, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, but that goes two ways because as a student, I grew up in a small town in America, and I went
Right.
to a small liberal arts college, and my first roommate was from Pakistan.
Oh,
I learned
wow.
so much about the world just from sitting at night talking with him over, he drank tea, I drank coffee, which is, a cultural moment in and of itself. But like, just like hearing what his life was like when he was growing up versus my life when I was growing up, what his educational background was versus mine. And to me, I learned so much from hanging out with my international like student friends. I don't think it's an accident that I ended up working in international affairs because I thoroughly enjoyed those encounters. And I think that all students can, find that when they think about studying abroad.
Certainly, certainly, and I'll also dilate upon the fact that you mentioned parents, and certainly, I think in Pakistan in particular, it's a fairly involved decision for parents to really step in to help their children make such a big transition. Let's say for education abroad, cost wise, time commitment wise,
Oh
and then
yeah,
of course the cultural potential for conflict. I think is there, which I think the U.S. having been home to the diverse backgrounds that the student bring in, it's a phenomenal experience. So
yeah.
great. So
Well,
if a lot,
well, let me
sorry,
say
go ahead.
one more thing about that, and,
Sure.
and that's that. I think one thing that I think everybody knows the big names in America, the Ivy League schools, and everyone wants to go to one of those. Like, I want to just also plug that, underneath that Ivy League, and I wouldn't even say underneath, side by side of that Ivy League schools, the United States has amazing educational opportunities, and so you can find incredible institutions and incredible teachers, sort of no matter where you go, because of the depth of our academia, and so one thing I always encourage parents to do is to do a little bit of research on their own, and think about what other schools might be a good fit for their kid as well.
Certainly, certainly. Fantastic. And I think this is a great segue for my next question, which kind of delves into our topic for today. I went to a state school in the Midwest, and I still remember doing my engineering degree. And as part of the general education requirements that they had, we had a fantastic teacher for political science. And one of the movies that I still recall very fondly is Wag the Dog, which
Oh yeah,
brings us home to a topic that social media really has redistributed power, not just amongst government and citizens, but also I think has taken power away from at least mainstream media. The media control or influencing media definitely used to be, or at least mainstream media used to be, let's say, a key part of propaganda per se.
yeah.
And that could be spun positively, that could be spun negatively. How do you think it's become a challenge, especially for large populous countries, whether they be democracies or the other extreme, the unmentionable
Sure. I
extreme?
mean, look, I will say, the United States has a core value of free expression and transparent information.
Mm,
So for me, I don't necessarily look at it as a challenge. I look at it the social media as an opportunity. Um,
mm,
Perhaps not a surprise as well. That's my job, is to use social media in order to share American values and the America's priorities and America's story.
yeah,
So for me, I think of it much more as it democratizes information, that everybody now has access to it in a much more open and transparent way. Sure, there's going to be some issues that come with that. Things that come to my mind immediately are misinformation and disinformation. Some of it's intentional, some of it's not. So, we do have to keep honing our critical thinking skills, what I like to call like digital citizenry. I think we have to really think about how we're going to engage online in order to be, good, informed citizens. But ultimately, because of this fundamental core value of freedom of expression and freedom of faith, and like I think that the social media platform gives, like, it democratizes things. It allows more people more access and more, readily, and that can only be a benefit. I'll use Pakistan really quickly as an example. If you look at the amount of people who have gained access to smart cell phones where they can actually access the internet in the past 10 years. It's gone from, less than 25% to about 70%. It's huge. And that just giving people with the touch of a button access to information, whether they're using WhatsApp or Facebook or, Twitter, I don't really care. But they're getting information in their hands every day. And so I look at it as an opportunity for me to share America's story and America's values via those platforms, and we can get access to everyday people, not just the wealthy or the super connected or those who have connections to mass media. So
Mm.
I we still work with mass media. They're very important. I spent all morning with the ambassador, helping him give interviews to mass media television networks. So it's not that those aren't important, but I do think that there's this democratizing aspect to social media that's important.
Very, very, very interesting. And I think the way that you twisted it correctly, so I think it does offer huge opportunities for engagement. That again, it's a complement to mass media. It's a way to perhaps tailor certain information to certain groups because you have the luxury of doing that and receiving a response. There's interactivity between, let's say, even news stories, the comments it generates, the discussion it generates,
Yeah.
and
I
to
mean, and
have common.
even if you watch the news now, like organizations are quoting Twitter, like, and so and if you look, it's really interesting in Pakistan, especially. A lot of news organizations or reporters or journalists are starting their own YouTube stations as well, and so this. The divide between mass media and social media is becoming much blurrier,
Very true.
again, because I think that getting more information into the hands of everyday people is important and should be valued. That I don't necessarily think these are bad things.
Sure.
And let's face it, Solomon. Like if you look at it, like social media can be fun. Like when we are with our friends or your family, you talk about like the dance videos you saw or the food videos you've seen. Everyone has their little corner of the internet that they love to spend a little bit of time and enjoy. And I think what I witness here in Pakistan that I'm inspired by is like particularly young people who are using social media to like for social movements, for political organizing. Man, if you look at environmental change activists, they're doing really interesting things
Yeah.
on social media to galvanize other youth to share their voice. So, when I look at my job working for the US government, and this is true for diplomacy, public diplomacy sections around the world, like our job is to tap into those conversations. It's to be,
Mm.
like what are people paying attention to? How can we, tap into that? And it doesn't have to be just. It can be fun. It can be
Sure.
a way of engaging with people.
Certainly, certainly. You touched upon something, the environmentalists and using social media as a force to galvanize. How do you feel social movements in the world have evolved on the back of social media? Obviously, it's given power to the people to again galvanize towards a common cause. As a force to unite people. Any thoughts that you can share on how you see things either on a global level or more particularly at a local Pakistani level?
I mean, as I said, I think the two things that I sort of keeping my eyes on are this blurry line between mass media and social media. That I think that more and more journalists are using YouTube in particular here in Pakistan to
Mm.
share their vision, to share their ideas. And the term gets tossed around infotainment quite a
Yeah.
lot, and
Mm.
so you have to think about as a viewer or a receiver of information, what biases might they have, where are they coming from? But I also think that again, it's not necessarily bad whenever we think about trying to reach more people with the messages that we have. Um, and then secondly, I think young people are really good at using social media.
Yeah.
And like social media influencers are a force to reckon with. And so I'll tell you, one of the first things that I did when I came into my job was like, I don't want to just talk to journalists. I want to talk to young people who are using social media to share their messages. Partly because I think they're really smart around it and they know how to tap into audiences. And so I like to find out who those people are and try to figure out what they're doing that's working, because I think we can learn a lot from each other in that way.
Certainly, certainly. Thank you. I think that well said. Um, and then, Carl, obviously, we discussed some of the dark sides of social media: the invasion of privacy, censorship, criminal behavior, access to information which should not ideally be there. I mean, even from something as mundane as employers checking, let's say, when they're looking to employ people, okay, what sort of worldview does this person hold, or what
Yeah.
do they subscribe to, and so on and so forth. Any comments in terms of what, again, you see from a global perspective, and how that's kind of distilled here in Pakistan? Is it the same?
Yeah, I think this is a global phenomenon. I don't think there's anything that's like too particular to Pakistan. I think the United States faces many of these challenges as well. I will say I think there is a tension here, which is on one hand, we have a core value set of freedom of speech, transparent information. Everybody has the right to their own beliefs, and they should have the ability to share them. And then there's this other flip side, which is, misinformation and disinformation can cause real harm. And so I think that's what um, I keep coming back to. I think as consumers of information, we have to be disciplined, and we have to think about where are things coming from and what point of view might that person have. Um, and if you are only using one source to get your information, you're probably not being terribly disciplined. So think about how you might be able to diversify what platforms are you using to get the information that you get, because you're right. There's a dark side to social media and the internet. Um, there's lots of false information out there. Some of it is, as I said, just misinformation. People don't necessarily know, or they're spreading things based on fear. And then there's more pernicious, what I would call disinformation, which is people who are actively trying to share, wrong information for their own good, and that can
Mm,
come from private citizens, private entities, and nations as a whole. You know, so while I think there is potential for harm because of what I talked about earlier about the democratization of information, I think there's a greater good at hand.
true,
And that's what
true.
we should be focused more on. But I will tell you that one of the things that we're working on in the State Department writ large is how do we educate people on how to best use information? How might we encourage young people or anybody really to fact check? How do you do that? And creating what I call digital citizens,
Mm.
because I think that's really important.
Correct. And so if I could ask you to dilate a bit upon, I think I'll completely agree that there's, again, false information, the disinformation, and sadly, the sensationalism sells. And so in this want or need to have more likes, or to have more following or subscribers, some unscrupulous elements may go to lengths to get there and become influencers, because, again, let's face it, it's phenomenally commercially viable, for the lack of better
Yeah.
terms. I mean, I've seen examples which I'm boggled by. I mean, the scale is unbelievable, and we've come across quite a few. We've again used them, I think, both at the healthcare institution and the educational institutions as well, because they have a voice, they have a platform, they've created a platform which is unlike others, and again, they're attracting a part of the community that otherwise may not consume the information that we're sending out. And of course, we're
Yeah.
attracting a lot of young people. So cyber hygiene is becoming an issue, and making sure that this consumption of information is adequately handled. So some of the things you said was to make sure that you assess the sources, you use a variety of platforms. Anything else? I mean, like you said, the State Department, you alluded, was also trying to educate, and I'm sure you're also learning as things go along, because this world is evolving. This
Sure. I
landscape.
mean, I think one of the things that I almost always do, like if there's a new Twitter information that seems like, is it too fast? Is a question that I ask for myself. Like, can I verify it from other places? Is another question that I ask. Um, what's the context for the information is a big important question. Can you place it into something larger that might give a different rationale as to why that happened or is
Interesting.
happening right now, as opposed to just taking that one piece of information and running with it. Um, and then the second one, or the I guess maybe the fourth in my list, but uh, the way that I often will check myself is I will read through the thread as because if you get to like the seventh or eighth or ninth comment underneath, that's often where people start to question the veracity of the thing.
Yeah.
Just the way that Twitter works is like if you get a like um, and the more people who like it, it tends to filter towards the top. But you will often find the disinfo, like or the debunking tweet thread underneath it. And so, if you find yourself sort of going, "Huh, is that true?" Read through the thread because often there's someone who is pointing out how one of those questions has an aspect to it that you need to think through. Um,
Mm,
so that's something that I often will do for myself. Um, and then I guess the last thing that I'll do, and it sounds really silly, is like, get online and type, "Is this true?" and what the thing is. And there are fact checking sites out there in the world that they really are a service to us because they will tell you what the fake information is out there. Here's how it started, and there's whole websites about it. And then they'll
sure.
tell you like, well, what the truth is. And so
Mm,
that's often what I will go to as well. Um, in terms of other cyber hygiene, it's not particularly sexy to talk about, but I will tell you that some things that I really encourage people to think about are, make sure that your passwords are updated, that they are unique just to you and unique to a particular site. They need to be quite long, have various symbols in them. You might think about using a password manager. Um,
mm,
and then other ways to just protect yourself or make sure that you use antivirus malware, that you update your software on any electrical device that you're using. Um, and then, recently in the last like 2 or 3 years, I think multi-factor authentication has become something that almost every, expert is saying is really important for you to
mm,
use,
yeah,
just as a protection.
sure.
Um, and then you sort of mentioned this right at the beginning, but I'm going to reiterate it, particularly for the younger people in our audience, that you need to recognize that anything that you put online is going to stay online forever. um, so think twice before you post something. Whether you might have really strong feelings about it now, but 2 weeks from now, are you going to feel the same way? Or that picture might be really great and kind of funny right now, but when your employer looks you up 5 years from now, is that picture going to be so funny?
Very
Is
true.
a question you might ask yourself.
Very true. And
So
no matter how much you scrub and try and get rid of that information, it's been reshared, reposted, retwittered, Insta, you name it. I mean, cached. It's going to be somewhere out there to come back and bite you when
exactly.
you're least
So,
expecting it.
in terms of the cyber hygiene like conversation, that's something I always talk about, which is,
Makes sense.
you'll notice even on my own like cyber use, like I don't really use them very much. I don't share very much about myself, and that's
Mm,
partly just for protection. Like I just
sure,
like there's no need. The people who are closest to me in my world, I can share those pictures on a more direct format than I need to, and so just think about it. Uh, Everyone has their own calculus that they make around those things, but I do think that particularly for young people, it's a question that they should be asking themselves now, with the idea that maybe in the future those pictures and those comments might reflect poorly on them, and so
sure.
think about it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So last relevant question, then we've got two general questions which we always end with. Any particular advice? You're in public relations world, and obviously you make social media work for you. Any two or three pertinent points that are kind of top of mind that work for you, or because there's people in this field, and it's useful for anybody, whether it's your personal persona that you're trying to project, or the company you're
Sure.
working for, or whatever, or something that you're galvanized towards in terms of a social cause. Any tips?
Well, I think one thing to remember. Well, I said this earlier, but I think it's not. illegal to be a little fun online. So, think about how you might be entertaining, or you might be a little like, joyful while you're posting things. I think that people react to that really well. And then maybe another thing to think about is that images themselves are perhaps even more important than the words that you write. We spend a lot of time wrestling with the language that we're going to use on our social media posts, and sometimes we don't wrestle nearly as much with the images that we use, the backgrounds, the everything else. And I think
Yes.
they actually are what people pay attention to. I mean, I think about my own usage, and I often just scroll through and I'm just looking at pictures. I'm not reading very much. And
Very
so
true.
that information embedded within images is really important.
Mhm.
And then, some basic like PR, foundational knowledge, which is you need to know your audience, you need to know what your messages are, your priorities for those messages, and then think about what timeline you want to share those messages to that audience are. Um, Social media is a funny thing because on one hand, you want to be really strategic about it. Like you want to think about things through time. Here in the consulate, we often will, plan out a visit 6 to 2 months in advance. We, at that time, will think about what is our social media, message going to be about that. So we develop a plan almost 2 months in advance, like in an ideal world. But when I think about social media and really effective social media, it's often quite quick and quite
Yeah.
reactive. And so you have to be nimble and flexible as well. So when that thing happens, um, I mean, for example, I can give you a very concrete example from our social media account. The most successful post that we've had since I started 7 months ago was when Pakistan did so well during the T20 cricket match. And we got everybody together very quickly and we just said, go green. And it was like 10 seconds, our CG, everyone was in their cricket gear. And it was just this fun little thing that we decided to do very last minute. And
Hmm.
it's been our most successful post ever. And I think it's because it tapped into the moment of like where Pakistan was at that moment, which was it was fun, it was clearly on message, but it was also like, we're celebrating with you, Pakistan. We want you to do so well, and we're excited for you too. And I think people can tap into that if the emotions are authentic.
Fantastic. And of course, a picture is worth a thousand words, like you said. So I'm sure you post a
Yeah.
photo with everybody in
Well, in
green
that
with.
case, it was a video as well, 10
Oh,
seconds.
perfect.
So,
Okay.
videos are not a bad thing.
Yeah, there you go. Reels, as we now know from Insta, right?
Yeah.
Which is, yeah. Hence, we shortened our program from 45 minutes to 30 because we got a lot of feedback. Hey, guys, you're not going to be
Too
able to
long.
engage in that long. Which reminds me that we are at time.
Okay.
But the last question that I'll just pitch to you, and this is a question that we pose to all our guests. You've got a diverse background from an education perspective. You've got diverse background from professional and where you've chosen geographies where you chose to work. What message would you pass on to students who are either with us now, students considering joining the education world, or to recent graduates who would just have graduated and are ready to hit the world?
I think the message that I often share with my team here, and I think about for my own life as well, is to like stay curious and take calculated risks. Um, that sometimes we get a little safe and we don't always take a risk. But I think it's important to say calculated risks. I don't want you jumping off buildings, but I do think that there are times when that thing might not go great, but it's maybe worth it, even if it doesn't go great. And so that's something that I think I draw this from my arts background. In the
Mm,
arts, like we often will try things that we know will fail just to learn what doesn't work about the thing. And so I think it's a really unique perspective of like, in a dance class, for example, like you're gonna try when you're just moving from one leg to another. Like sometimes we'll try and do it as far as you can go, and you'll fall down. Like if you do
mhm,
it right, but you learn, oh, I can't go that far. So the next time you do it, you take just a little bit less of a risk, and you get a different kind of information.
mm,
But if you never went too far, you'll never know where that threshold is. And so that's what I think about a lot, which is like, where is our threshold? What kind of risks can I take, and can I not take? And so, you know, you have to be super curious in order to do that, but it does take a little bit of bravery.
Yeah.
So maybe stay curious and be a little brave is what I would
Thank
say.
you, thank you. And I think that's wonderful, and I would agree that as somebody from the U.S. being immersed in our culture, generally, I've also found that we generally risk averse, especially the younger people, by virtue, I think, perhaps of how our grounding is. We're very culturally staged in a lot of ways, not in a negative way necessarily, but yes, I think taking calculated, not that huge leap of faith, but hey, let's jump that little divide a little bit. But you're right. I think being curious will help you do that. Um, and I'll also say that the generation now has the benefit, again, not just of social media, but the information revolution, which makes things so accessible that you really can make your risk much more calculated than, for example, when I was pursuing my educational degree or ready to start a profession. And Carl sitting in front of us here today had a very different educational career, and look at the professional direction that he chose to land, and is doing successfully. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. So with that, I think if you allow any last words, or we can.
No, just thank you for giving me half an hour of your time. It's been a joy to sit and reflect, and also to be with students again. As you mentioned in my bio, I used to be a professor, and I do love being with students. So this was a nice reminder. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carl, for spending your last 30 minutes with us and for imparting your words of wisdom, nuggets. Everybody's got their careers, their experiences, which they can share from, and that's exactly what we're trying to draw out on these sessions. So thank you again, and hope to see you on campus sometime soon. Inshallah.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye bye.